What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by Korn. Basically, they're a new metal band, and they did a lot of kind of leery and kind of glaring alternative metal. Also, they really took the world by storm with this album that dropped in the fall of 1994, and it just has an overall haunting sheen that was kind of unlike most projects around this time. This is definitely a revolutionary project and helped set the new metal world by storm. I think between this project and then Sepultura's Chaos AD, those were a couple of the albums that really kicked off the new metal stuff. But the fact that it was as far back as like 93 and 94 is pretty awesome. I just would have to say that, John Davis and the rest of Korn did a pretty outstanding job, not just with kicking off a genre, but actually having some excellent music also. I mean, this album made it to the fourth single, and a lot of these just really had like that overt kind of theme. I mean, prior to this, I'd have to say maybe Smashing Pumpkins. I'm not really wholesomely sure if Smashing Pumpkins was entirely always kind of haunting and more autumn related, but I do kind of feel like some of this glaring, kind of really woozy and wheezing kind of some of this woozy and kind of wheezing kind of fall like music around this project was just kind of, I mean, Korn typically does kind of station their music towards like September, October, November and stuff, but I think folks were still kind of I think folks were still kind of reeling off of Alice in Chains and Nirvana and the beginning of Foo Fighters and some of that type stuff in 1994. And it was just, rock music was kind of gaping wide. I mean, there just wasn't really like it felt like in rock music, this area was kind of gaping wide because it just didn't feel like there was an overabundance of dominant factors in rock music in the fall of 1994. I mean, you did have Nine Inch Nails and the leftover remnants of Nirvana and Alice in Chains, but there was a lot of new revolutionary things that kind of happened throughout 94. You had the start of Foo Fighters, the start of Korn, just like things like post grunge starting to happen, alternative metal, new metal, some of that type of stuff. So there was a lot of stuff going on around this time, but I did definitely like this Korn album. Now, I will say about it, it's not my favorite Korn album, and that doesn't mean it's a bad album. It just, I don't view it as Korn's best. Like, even Jonathan Davis himself. I remember going to like Loudwire. I remember going to the Loudwire rock website, and the fans basically voted on the poll that they said that this album by Korn was their favorite album, and John Davis, the lead vocalist of Korn, also said that this was his favorite album also. Personally, I prefer Issues and a little bit of Follow the Leader and some of Life is Peachy, but I do feel like this is a pretty solid album, and it's revolutionary. I mean, this was the album where Korn was kind of taking shots in the dark, trying to shape the sound that would later become their sound and that type of stuff. So it wasn't like they had any real uh it wasn't as if they really had any fulcrums to really build upon this particular time as far as trying to station out their sound, and there just weren't an overabundance of kind of glaring autumn related alternative metal around this time. I mean, I think Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, and Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson were at least kind of haunting, but there just was not much apart from Marilyn Manson that really had like an emphatic theme on like autumn and September, October type stuff. But I do appreciate it. So there were four singles off this project. The first one was Blind, and this is a pretty definitive Korn song, I just would have to say. To me, it's just a really haunting kind of evening autumn song. It's pretty signature. It's definitely one of their songs I think probably gets played quite a bit, and it just really is the first single that they dropped, and it was an instant kind of hit. That just kind of happens to be the concept behind it. It just really has that kind of glaring kind of guitar licks in there. It's just the sort of alternative metal. Now, I definitely think they perfected this sound definitely by Issues, but also they did better riffs on like Life is Peachy and definitely also on Follow the Leader. But this is definitely one in terms of in terms of the first Korn song and the stuff that would shape their sound and showcase to the world what they were about. This is definitely a good example of hitting the ground running and that type of stuff as far as being able to do it. I do think that there's far better Korn songs, but in terms of like the first song that people heard from them, this does a pretty damn well job. So it's just kind of a nice one. I really like the chorus on here. This really has that kind of snaring, kind of teeth gnashing kind of grimace about it that just happens to really work pretty well. And I just overall like the haunting feel of it. It's just a real kind of nightmarish of a song, especially for 1994. So Need To is the second single, and this is definitely like a glaring kind of backyard party kind of song. This has like that really kind of edgy riff in there. It's a little bit more edgy and a little bit more paced than Blind, but it definitely has a nice kind of rousing metal pace about it. I really like the kind of feel of this song. It's a little bit more creepy and a little bit more edgy and that type of stuff, but it's definitely a spooky venue kind of cut. I feel like if you're at a more music venue or a night venue that has a little bit more of like a ghoulish kind of gothic theme towards it, this is a definite highlight for that sort of night out. Blind is kind of in that same vein, but at least this one's a lot more emphasis on kind of like the haunting kind of feels. This is where Korn really started tearing into, well, all of the singles are pretty dark, but this one's just a particularly rousing metal song that's kind of gothic. This happens to be a thing. Shoots and Ladders is the third single, and this one just kind of has lyrics just based upon kids' lyrics and that type of stuff. I do like the concept of it kind of being like a distorted and kind of twisted kind of song in a lot of ways. I just like the concept of it. This is one that I've heard on the radio a few times. I've heard Blind a couple times. I've heard Shoots and Ladders, and I want to say I've even heard Need to once or twice, but I definitely have heard Shoots and Ladders a lot. This is one that continues to be a highlight on rock radio, just as a throwback to old Korn. But this one just kind of, this one is probably the most presentable of the singles. I feel like this one just has a lot more emphasis compared to Blind. Blind's kind of like a creepy, moody kind of song, and Need to is kind of more of like a thrashing kind of metal song. But Shoots and Ladders is just like a standard commercial rock kind of song, at least commercial as Korn would get. This is definitely one that's the most presentable out of all the four singles, and it definitely reminds me of like Marilyn Manson's Sweet Dreams that kind of crested throughout the summer of 1995 and that type of stuff, or was it the summer of 96? It's just the same kind of format of like a glaring but still kind of commercial, kind of gothic metal type stuff. It just really works as far as that kind of goes. And this is probably, if I had to pick the single out of the four that was the most presentable for new fans of Korn that don't really know them that well, I'd probably say that Shoots and Ladders is the bigger highlight than Blind, but they're all good. All four of the singles are excellent. Clown is the fourth single, and this one really has like the most leery kind of all the beats of the singles. This one is a really hauntum kind of asylum like song. Definitely feels like a bee swarm and kind of like a nasty kind of dark metal sense. It just really has like that swirling kind of synthy kind of rock on here. This is a perfect kind of crazy kind of sounding song. This is just an excellent one. This really showcased the head case type feel of the band. I definitely like this, and I kind of, the more I think about it, I cannot think of many riffs they're quite as like glaring and leery as this song Clown. This is definitely one of Korn's more haunting songs. This is definitely a highlight off this album. This is one of the best songs off the album, and just overall probably a career highlight for Korn also. This is definitely an underappreciated single and needs to get more kind of airplay and stuff, because this is an excellent one. But so I'm going to go ahead and talk about the rest of the album now. So out of 12 songs on this album, the only other two songs I recommend to you apart from the four singles would just be Predictable and Helmet in the Bush. That's really about as far as it goes. And Predictable is just kind of a metal-like song like Need to, but it's just kind of real quick. Both verses kind of go by within the first minute and a half or so, but it's just a really rousing kind of song. Has a nice metal pace about it, and it's kind of ghoulish in that sense also. So yeah, Predictable is just kind of a nice metal type tune on here. It's just real quick kind of song, but I do like this one. It just has like an overall ghoulish kind of pace about it. It's just an overall nice highlight. Helmet in the Bush is a real nice thumping pace kind of song. It just oozes kind of charisma. This one just has like a real nice thump and like the drums and like the guitar on here. Just John Davis really keeps up with the production on this song. He rides this instrumental really well. This just really happens to be a thing. This is just a nice one that kind of just has a lot of oozing about it. Just really has like that kind of charismatic feel for like a metal song, which most of the time they're kind of noisy and rousing and screamo and that type of stuff. But this is just kind of one, or you just kind of feel like the kind of charismatic type feel of like John Davis and just his kind of appealing character in this one. I just really like the concept behind it. There needed to be more songs like this. I feel like, in my opinion, I like the metal Korn, but I also like some of these leery kind of ones like Clown and Blind and Helmet in the Bush and a little bit of Shoots and Ladders. I mean, I do feel like Korn can kind of do metal, but sometimes they kind of come off more of like Mushroom Head more so than actual like the leery kind of stuff that's the autumn type feel of what they do. I mean, sometimes they are more Marilyn Manson and Mushroom Head than the actual kind of leery alternative metal, new metal type stuff that Korn is known for. And sometimes, I mean, they can do both. They can do metal, but I just like them kind of when they do more like these haunting kind of alternative metal kind of feels about it. But this is kind of a blend. I mean, they were kind of crafting a sound which would later be shaped for a lot of things in rock music later down the road. So it just kind of happens to be a thing as far as trying to say that they did pretty solid job about it. But yeah, I guess that leads me into like the complaints about this project. So there's just kind of some bad kind of produced songs on here. Like I feel like ball tongue, the F word, and like Lies and some of those type songs, and definitely Daddy. These just have pretty poor produced beats on here, or just instrumentation. I just kind of feel like really what should have been a model for Korn to have made more songs like should have definitely been the haunting and kind of just commercial packaging of Shoots and Ladders, and then definitely another beat like Clown, another instrumentation like Clown, and just an overall another haunting kind of sprawling song like Blind. I mean, that's definitely, I feel like Korn kind of struggled. I feel like Korn kind of struggled a little bit with their album cuts this time around. They definitely did a great job of getting to like the fourth single on their first album, which is pretty excellent. But this album kind of comes up short when trying to talk about like things that kind of facilitate. And they didn't have this problem later on, but this was kind of patchy. I just think that's kind of the thing. And Daddy, I kind of like the production on that song, but it just was way too long, and I don't know why that wound up being a 9.5 minute song. I mean, if that had just been like 3.5 minutes, I probably would have vibed with it a lot more. But I don't know why they chose to make that such a lengthy one. But there's just some ones on here that just, really one of the worst produced ones, one of the worst kind of band songs on here is Ball Tongue. That one just had some really awkward kind of nails on a chalkboard kind of feels towards it in terms of the verses. And it's kind of the same thing with and Lies. I mean, it's just some of those just kind of ones just kind of don't add up as far as like the way that some of this kind of happens. I mean, I'm kind of retreading what I was saying, but I just kind of look after it. I just think the concept behind it is I really feel like it's more the metal kind of songs that I just wound up not quite being quite as convinced with. I just think Korn coming off as a metal band needed the kind of spooky veneer about them, and it just kind of feels like they just sound more of like a typical kind of metal band more so than the aesthetic that they should have, which is distinct to Korn. That's what they need, and they definitely realized that. They didn't. I mean, it's not to say that these metal songs are bad, but some of these riffs, like there's one on Divine that's just kind of bad. I kind of felt like the riff just did not compare to the one on Need To, which Need To had one of the best riffs on here, and Blind was a pretty good one. But in terms of like catchy riffs on this project, it just doesn't have an overabundance of them, especially in songs that are not the singles. So it just needed some catchier riffs and better kind of album cuts and stuff, and just more leery productions to kind of help boost their sound, which was really clever that they crafted and made. But in terms of what I'm going to score this album, me liking 6 songs out of 12, plus me liking all 4 of the singles, I'm just going to go ahead and give this album like a 6 out of 10. I feel like that's pretty solid enough. I would give it a 5.75, but just the fact that they had 4 singles on the first album and all of them are excellent. They just have a real revolutionary sound that was crafted extremely well. They did a lot for rock music, and they were just an overall kind of pleasant surprise out of the early 90s and stuff. There's a lot to credit this band for what they did. So it gets a 6 instead of just like a typical, like, 5.5, 5. I mean, it's not too much better, but you get the idea that the credit is served. The social score, I'm going to go ahead and give a 7, just because 4 singles that are pretty social plus 2 extra cuts, and they're actually, you might like some of these other ones. I mean, Korn at least kind of has their appealing character as far as just their personality that just oozes charisma and that type stuff. So there's probably some stuff that even for folks that like more than what I recommended, you might find a few extras. But for the most part, these kind of backyard party and kind of more social moments that are just intended for a night out or some creepy kind of autumn shindigs and that type of stuff. I feel like, songs like Blind, songs like Shoots and Ladders, songs like Helmet in the Bush, songs like Need To, and especially Clown, and some of those just really carry some pretty relative energy and just like a complete highlighted sense. That just kind of happens to be a thing. So in terms of the future, Korn has been absent. They did re-release their Requiem album in like an EP format with like some live editions or something like that, and at the beginning of this year, like in February. And then their most recent album came out in February of 2022. So I mean, they've been here since 1994, so they take more time off. I'm trying to think. There are some more Korn records I need to review, but there's not as many as there were. I've reviewed quite a bit, so